Atomic Habits by James Clear is a self-help book designed to drive behavior change over the long term. Built on the notion that small changes can spark powerful transformations, this practical volume explains what motivates human behavior with the goal of showing people how to improve their lives. As readers add good habits and subtract bad ones from their regular routines, their sense of well-being and fulfillment will slowly but surely improve. Generally, people underestimate the significance of small improvements, as well as small transgressions. Very often, successes and failures build over the long term. But Western culture is obsessed with immediate results. People are too goal-oriented when they should be paying more attention to the underlying processes that help them achieve or fail to achieve those goals. The best way to alter habits is to understand the 4 laws of behavior change. These 4 laws are based on the 4 steps that must transpire for any habit to come full circle: cue, craving, response, and reward. The habit of eating cookies, for example, can be broken down into 4 discrete steps. The cue might be the smell of warm cookies. The craving is the desire that the smell stirs. The response is to satisfy that desire by eating cookies, and the reward is the taste of the freshly baked treats. The first law of behavior change focuses on the cue, which isn't always obvious. For example, the cue that prompts watching television might not be the desire to watch television, but seeing the remote control, which is always on the coffee table in plain sight. The first step of breaking a bad habit requires knowing the cue. The second law is to make the new behavior attractive. This can be difficult since personal preferences are often deeply ingrained. Most people who hate going to the gym can't simply tell themselves to start enjoying it. Instead, they might listen to a favorite album while on the treadmill or indulge in a massage after a hard workout. Suddenly, going to the gym doesn't sound so bad. Good habits should be easy according to the third law of behavior change. By making a behavior automatic, similar to a muscle memory, instead of an activity that requires concentration and effort, a habit becomes firm. Another strategy is to create an environment that supports good choices, such as removing all sugary foods from the house in an effort to defeat a sweet tooth. The fourth and final law of behavior change is that good habits should be satisfying. Conversely, bad habits should be unpleasant. The human brain has evolved to appreciate recognition and rewards, so anyone trying to implement a new habit should celebrate small wins, such as going to the gym 2 days in a row. Bad habits should be altered so that they're painful in some way. A new gym goer, for example, might promise to give a colleague $10 for every day he doesn't fulfill his commitment to work out after work. The more often a new behavior is repeated, the more ingrained it becomes. For better or for worse, seemingly small choices will slowly build towards major transformation. It's important to keep in mind that self-improvement is a lifelong process, not a terminal goal. Neither bad habits nor good habits are permanent, which helps keep life interesting. Key insights. 1. Small habit changes can produce outsized effects that improve or degrade quality of life. 2. Habits are intertwined with personal identity. 3. A person who wants to break a bad habit may wish to use a commitment device, which is a preventative measure that limits future actions. 4. Outcomes are a delayed reaction to long-standing habits. 5. How people talk about a new habit, even to themselves, affects its implementation. 6. A new habit is more likely to become ingrained if it's easy. 7. Good habits yield positive results over the long term. Bad habits only bring short-term gain. 8. Environments can be designed to better support good habits. Analysis. Key Insight 1. Small habit changes can produce outsized effects that improve or degrade quality of life. Many people overestimate the degree of change that's needed to have a large positive or negative influence over their lives. A relatively small lifestyle tweak can spark a large-scale transformation. Journalist and productivity expert Charles Duhigg begins The Power of Habit with 2 examples. One of a small habit changing an individual's life, and the other of a small change impacting an entire community. Lisa Allen was in her 30s when she decided to stop smoking and start running. At the time, she led an extremely unhealthy lifestyle. She was unhappy, obese, and weighed down by financial debts. Quitting cigarettes led to changes that Allen hadn't envisioned, including steady work, savings, and a health and wellness makeover. Scientists who studied her situation carefully determined that replacing smoking with running was what they call a keystone habit that unlocked a series of seemingly unrelated changes. Keystone habits vary from person to person, but replacing smoking with a healthy behavior is a common one. Duhigg's collective example was a phenomenon that he witnessed as a reporter in the Middle East. He was shadowing a high-ranking military officer who had been tasked with ending riots in a volatile Iraqi town. The officer took an unconventional approach, analyzing the psychology of the crowd instead of enforcing martial law. Ultimately, the officer arranged for the removal of food vendors from the town plazas. This seemingly insignificant change disrupted the riot pattern because people became hungry late in the day. Instead of being moved to violence, they simply went home to get something to eat. Small changes in any community can lead to surprisingly dramatic outcomes. For instance, a town that adds streetlights to a dark neighborhood may see a swift drop in crime. Key Insight 2. Habits are intertwined with personal identity. Often, habits are more tied to a person's identity than to goals for the future. Religious identity, for instance, can dictate daily habits in ways that are small or profound. Many Jewish and Muslim people don't eat pork and follow other dietary strictures that impact their daily choices. A Buddhist might meditate 1 or more times per day, a practice that requires commitment. Mormons avoid caffeine and other stimulants. For people trying to implement similar habits for health-related reasons, adoption might be more difficult because the new habit is tied to the goal of good health, rather than a part of their core identity. The Pew Research Center has found that highly religious people across all faiths tend to have different daily habits than their less religious counterparts. Highly religious people, defined here as those who pray daily and attend services on a weekly basis, tend to be more involved with their families and their communities. They meet with extended family more often and volunteer and donate money more frequently. These habits are reinforced when they are organized through places of worship, and practices such as giving to the poor are tied to whether or not individuals and their spiritual community emphasize it as an essential practice. For instance, almost 2/3 of Christians who see charitable giving as essential to their identities as Christians have donated time or goods, including money, to the poor over the last week. But that number drops for Christians who don't see giving as an essential element of their religious identity. In addition to personal identity, accountability, or the act of making oneself answerable to another person or a group of people, is an important factor to consider with regard to establishing habits. Habits are easier to establish when individuals feel accountable to someone else, who is in a place to evaluate their identity. Highly religious people often have a built-in sense of accountability to their family, the larger community, or God. A convert to Judaism, for example, might feel more motivated to stop eating bacon than someone who wants to lose weight. Key Insight 3. A person who wants to break a bad habit may wish to use a commitment device, which is a preventative measure that limits future actions. A commitment device is any step taken to make a bad habit harder to execute in the future. For example, people who want to spend less money might cut up their credit cards or carry only a budgeted amount of cash. Most commitment devices aren't irreversible. They just make the undesirable behavior harder to execute. Mobile devices used to be touted for their ability to make people more reachable, but now manufacturers recognize the need to address the new problem of digital addiction. In September 2018, when Apple released iOS 12, it included several features to help concerned users curb the use of their iPhones. One of these features, Screen Time Tools, helps users monitor their habits by showing graphic reports of how much time they spent on the phone, and on each app that day or week. Users gain more awareness of how they use apps. Screen Time Tools also allows users to set limits for the length of time they can spend engaging in a certain activity. This commitment device can be overridden, but it adds an extra layer of difficulty. Another Apple iOS 12 feature, Downtime, serves a similar function by letting users mute all or selected notifications for certain periods of the day. While Apple is an industry leader with its use of built-in commitment devices, other device manufacturers and digital platforms are developing or using similar tools, including Android, which, as of late 2018, had similar features in beta testing, and Facebook and Instagram, which offer features that help users better manage their time. Key Insight 4. Outcomes are a delayed reaction to long-standing habits. The eventual outcome of a behavior that's repeated many times only makes itself known in the fullness of time. But most people erroneously interpret the present moment as a firm predictor of the future. For example, language lessons will result in fluency for most people, eventually, but building that knowledge takes time. New students of Spanish may feel frustrated by their lack of progress after 2 months if they've been putting in a lot of study time. But their fluency level at 2 months and at 2 years will likely be quite different if the lessons continue. One reason a beginner might have trouble envisioning fluency in a new language at a later date is that the human brain has a hard time projecting the idea of the self into the future. For example, if asked to contemplate his life at age 65, a 20-year-old man is highly likely to regard his future self as a stranger. Psychologists have found that showing young people digitally altered photos of themselves with wrinkles and gray hair helped offset this self-estrangement. Building on these findings, Merrill Edge, a Bank of America corporation, developed a digital photo booth designed to show young people what they might look like decades down the road. If customers can envision themselves later in life, they become more likely to save money for retirement. Having the visual aid of a digitally altered photograph helps them feel more connected to their future selves. Key Insight 5. How people talk about a new habit, even to themselves, affects its implementation. The way a person frames a habit, privately or in conversation with others, can influence whether or not the habit ultimately sticks. People who frame new habits in a positive light tend to be more successful than people who impose a frame of loss or difficulty. For example, someone who wants to go to bed earlier should focus on positive outcomes, such as, "I'll be well rested for my important meeting tomorrow," instead of sacrifices like, "I regret that I don't have time to watch another episode of this TV show before bed." Another strategy for framing a new routine in a positive light is to make executing the routine as attractive and pleasurable as possible. A new mattress or a luxurious set of sheets might do the trick for getting to bed early. Even less expensive changes, like aromatherapy oils or soft music, may make sleep seem more inviting. Repeating the same pleasant ritual in the moments before sleep every single night can help anchor the habit by leveraging the power of repetition and cues. The single most important strategy when discussing new goals is to use as much specificity as possible. Someone who says, "I'd like to start getting more sleep," doesn't have an actionable plan, but rather a nebulous wish, which is easier to dismiss. A better way to set the goal would be to say, "I want to get an extra hour of sleep every night," a goal that I will accomplish by starting to wind down at 9:30 p.m. Simply by setting the intention out loud, even in an empty room, raises the likelihood of actually following through. Key Insight 6. A new habit is more likely to become ingrained if it's easy. New habits can be difficult to implement, particularly when the behavior requires some great effort. The paradox is that many people falsely believe that a great expenditure of effort is required to effect real change in their lives. Organization expert Rachel Hoffman points to what she calls marathon cleaning as an example of this mentality. Often, people let their residence get messy for a few weeks or months without tidying or cleaning in earnest. Then, when their homes become too messy to bear, they clean for hours or even days. As a result, their homes are messy most of the time because they want to delay another marathon cleaning session for as long as possible. If these people could implement consistent habits, they could exert a small amount of effort every day, instead of a huge amount of effort every once in a while. Hoffman recommends a technique she refers to as the 20-10, which is a half hour consisting of 20 minutes of cleaning and 10 minutes of break time. 20 minutes is long enough to make real progress without feeling exhausted. It also teaches people that they can clean in short bursts instead of long sessions. Hoffman also recommends a series of miniature challenges, such as moving 5 things from a cluttered table or taking 5 minutes to start organizing a drawer. Big tasks, especially when dealing with a very large mess, may seem overwhelming, but short bursts of activity make the project feel more accessible. Her hope is that the cleaning behavior is more likely to be repeated because it wasn't so unpleasant as a longer session. Key Insight 7. Good habits yield positive results over the long term. Bad habits only bring short-term gain. The way to distinguish a constructive habit from a damaging one is to evaluate its effects over the long term. Generally speaking, bad habits only pay off in the short term, producing delayed negative effects. For example, a smoker might use a cigarette to alleviate anxiety in the moment, but the smoker's health will suffer later in life. In its Guide to Internet Security, The Wirecutter, a product review website, points to the importance of good personal habits in maintaining secure electronic devices like laptops and phones. The problem is that creating extra layers of digital security generally requires some level of mild inconvenience, such as needing a little extra time to log into a Twitter account. But the long-term payoff for that extra effort is a secure account. Take, for example, two-factor authentication, a security feature that can be used to protect important accounts, like email. The user must go through the short-term hassle of using a second login, such as entering a numerical sequence received via text. Similarly, strong passwords with random sequences of numbers, letters, and symbols are more difficult to remember than passwords based on information that's front of mind, such as a child's birthday or a common word. Steps like two-factor authentication add friction to the login process in the moment, but that difficulty is minor compared to dealing with identity theft. Good digital habits that can be partially or fully automated are ideal because they require less effort on the part of the user while still promoting the same good long-term outcomes. For example, someone who can't implement the habit of memorizing many different strong passwords might use software that can remember multiple passwords with a single login. People can also automate software updates on devices like tablets and desktop computers to keep their systems more secure, or automate a process for backing up essential files. In this way, the short-term pain of prolonged identification can be smoothed, leading to better long-term security outcomes. Key Insight 8. Environments can be designed to better support good habits. When it comes to cultivating the right habits, context matters. An environment can help ingrain new habits or break old ones. For example, at home, a dieter may wish to pay special attention to arranging the kitchen so that it's easier to make healthy choices. Nutritious foods like fruit should be visible and within easy reach. Less healthful foods like candy and cookies should be out of sight and difficult to reach, perhaps on a high shelf. Another environment to pay attention to is the workplace. By placing free or reduced-price healthful snacks in a high-traffic area, employers can help workers avoid the mid-morning and midday productivity slumps that can come from low blood sugar or sugar highs. Well-designed chairs and standing desks also support healthy habits and good posture. Dan Buettner, author of The Blue Zones of Happiness, a book about the world's happiest places, points to other outside-of-the-box options like on-site healthcare, fitness classes, and farmers markets. But these solutions are more complicated or costly. Buettner's Blue Zones concept is based on the idea that the most happy, satisfied people in the world surround themselves by cues that encourage healthy behaviors. To that end, he encourages community organizers and city planners to think about the ways environmental design can influence people's behavior on a larger scale. Since most individuals don't have the power to reorganize their environments on that scale, when an environment is dramatically unsuitable, Buettner encourages people to consider moving cities or even countries if possible. Someone who wants to be less sedentary might become more active in a city with ample sidewalks and pedestrian crosswalks. And sometimes it takes a new environment to break deeply ingrained bad habits, such as substance abuse.